Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 559, It Knew No Medicine, a poem that has given scholars all kinds of fits trying to figure out exactly what it is Emily's referencing in this poem. Most think it has something to do with death, and this is to that degree another death poem. It isn't clear though whether we're talking literal or a metaphoric death of a kind. Many have brought us back to 396 in our study there. There was a languor of the life more eminent than pain. 'Tis pain's successor when the soul has suffered all it can. A drowsiness diffuses, a dimness like a fog envelopes consciousness as mists obliterate a crag. The surgeon does not blanch at pain. His habit is severe. But tell him that it ceased to feel the creature lying there, and he will tell you skill is late. A mightier than he has ministered before him. There's no vitality. Now our assumptions, I think you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 558 poems. We just finished with 558, but Little Caroline. Now, is this another poem about publishing? The great scholar Ruth Miller seemed to think so. She argued that maybe this is a reference to Sam Boyles, the publisher, somehow refusing to publish any of Emily's poetry, and therefore there is somehow death because of a lack of interest in Emily's poetry. Or is it another poem about the flood question, as we called it, the question of afterlife and immortality? I'm going to leave it up to you to decide. Obviously everything hinges on how you decide what it in this poem is. Is it death? By the way, notice if you'll qualify 'twas as it, the contraction, you'll have 5 of these in the poem. It knew no medicine, it was not sickness then, nor any need of surgery, and therefore 'twas not pain. It moved away the cheeks, a dimple at a time, and left the profile plainer. And in the place of bloom, it left the little tent that never had a name. You've seen it on a cast's face. Was paradise to blame? If momentarily ajar, temerity drew near, and sickened ever afterward for somewhat that it saw. Now, you're going to circle the question mark at the end of the poem, because it is a question. In other words, what was it that caused this strange thing, death maybe, that medicine couldn't fix? By the way, it knew no medicine will take us to the next poem, 560, it knew no lapse nor diminution. So this construction is interesting that she'll use it in back-to-back poems in the Johnson edition. It was not sickness, she says, then. In other words, now, again, there's 2 ways to read this. Well, once you're dead, you're not sick. In that regards, the dead are healed because they're not sick, because they can't be sick because they're dead. So notice the irony here. It was not sickness then, nor any need of surgery, and therefore 'twas not pain. In other words, after the death, there is no pain. So be careful what you wish for, because if you wish for a life of no pain or suffering, well, there is something that's called death, right? That's called death. And she says, it wasn't pain. But again, are we talking about a physical death, or are we talking about some kind of spiritual or emotive death? Maybe even something that a pain or suffering that she has gone through, and now she can speak of it as not being so painful. Notice, whatever the it is, moved away the cheeks, a dimple at a time. It's easy to read this as obviously physical death. And left the profile plainer, and in the place of bloom, we're back to flowers again, it left the little tent. I told you about her use of the word little in 172 poems. She loves to emphasize fragility and smallness. That never had a name, right? Now for the first time she invites you into the poem. You've seen it on a cast's face. They used to do this thing where when you died, they would put plaster over your face, and they would lift it off to show your face and what it looked like, okay? Because you didn't have photographs at the time or whatever. Was paradise to blame? Now here's where the poem gets interesting. It's almost as if Emily's suggesting that for a split moment, I got a glimpse of paradise. I got a glimpse of something amazing. And if, notice, momentarily ajar, almost like a door where you get to see through and you see paradise, you see nirvana, you see perfection. Temerity drew near. Temerity used in poems 1386, 1432, and 1561. Courage, temerity. In other words, the willingness to look, drew near, and then sickened. Ever afterward, for somewhat that it saw. In other words, Was there a glimpse, maybe, of something that turned away the hope? I think the message of this poem is that sometimes just the sight of some kind of paradise is enough to kill, or at least to cause tremendous pain. At 2b, well, obviously, the ambiguity of it comes to mind. At 3a, we mentioned poem 396. Go back and study that poem as it relates to this one. I think that's compelling. And of course, we can think about our Dante, who gets his what? Well, his glimpse of first hell, and then Purgatorio, and then finally Paradiso. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net on the Divine Commedia. Finally, at 3b, what was a time in your life when you caught a glimpse of something really good, and somehow that glimpse caused you pain that was very difficult to somehow extinguish? Thank you.